Welcome to Disrupt Design, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of the most creative and innovative product designers in the industry. We are hosts, Benjamin Yang and Scott Whiteley. As lead product designers at Blot Studio, we're always on the lookout for new ideas and fresh perspectives that can help us stay ahead of the curve in the competitive world of Fintech. Each episode, we sit down with some of the most fascinating and accomplished minds in product design as they share their stories, insights, and experiences. From the early stages of their career to their current roles at some of the biggest names in the business, our guests take us on a journey through their successes, challenges, and lessons learned. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the world of design, one interview at a time. Today we have Batsi. He is a fellow designer from South Africa. And Batsi, would you like to give us an intro?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. So, I'm Batsi. I am quite active on LinkedIn, so some of you might know me from there. I'm Zimbabwean actually, but my career my Korean product design started off in South Africa. So I graduated and started my own agency, just like what you guys are doing. So I understand some of the pains you're going through and potentially could go through, because I did that for 5 years with my friend.
Yeah. Wow.
And our target was also startups, not really tech or fintech startups, but more people in Zimbabwe who were subsidizing their day-to-day income by starting companies. So it ranges for everything from chickens to farming to social media companies to you name it, right? So we did that for 5 years. Then I moved into product design in South Africa. Then I moved to Dubai with product design. And that's, I think, when my journey in fintech really started, and design for financial services. Because when I made the switch from digital design to product design in South Africa, it was for an agency that just won the digital transformation project for Standard Bank. So I started product design with that project, and then I moved to Dubai, where an agency had won the FAB piece of work. So again, that was banking. And then from then on, it's just been banking, and banking, right? So I'd like to say like financial services has been the constant within my product design career. And now I'm head of design at a bank. So it kind of came full circle there.
Big ups here.
Thank you.
And so I think coupling all those experiences that you've had working within a South African region and then the UAE, what would you say the biggest challenges have been for you in regards to the design thinking? And because the way in which your users think and use the product are so vastly different, what would you say have been like some biggest challenges you've had?
So I'll answer that in two parts. So half of my career has been product design, and the other half has been primarily centered around design systems. So from a product design perspective, I would say working at a large company, especially like banks and large agencies. With agencies, the problem is always client budget, right? So we understand as product designers, there's a good way to do something and a quick and dirty way to do something. And a lot of the times when you're at agencies, it's the quick and dirty way, because clients have a set budget and they have a set timeline, and you can't really take the time out to do a proper product design process, right? I'm talking about, the research, etc. So we have to find ways of still doing great work within those confines, which a lot of the times means finding ways of expediting research, leaning heavily around domain experts with your clients. So if you're trying to innovate around compliance, like regulatory and compliance, then you talk to those people, you interview them, gather as much information as you can. So if you're trying to create a solution, it's something that's feasible at the end of the day, not just disruptive for the sake of disruption, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as agency and product design, I would say it's always time and budget that kills the design process, which is the same when you then move to client side. So from agency, I then moved to working for the banks themselves. And typically I feel like what's great about banks is they have a lot of money, right? So they're posting billions of dollars in net profits, right? Mm-hmm. So budget isn't really a discussion that's not constructive. I'd say they have more budget to do things that we want to do. And when I joined the bank I'm working for now, one of the things that the leadership kept saying was, we want to be more customer first. We want to test our hypothesis. We want to test our assumptions. Please make sure if we're designing a journey, you're testing with actual customers. Yeah. And they will avail the budget for you to do that within the time you have, right? So it's actually changing now. I would say that problem is going away now that I'm client side. We are often encouraged to actually test our solutions with actual customers. So that's not a problem. The problem then comes on the other side of it, where large organizations, there's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of politics that you need to take into account when you're dealing with stakeholders and trying to build a product that aligns with everyone's KPIs and objectives for that particular year. So then you have other set of problems that you need to work with as a designer. You're not just in a silo anymore. When you're at agency, you are just designers at agency giving a solution, right? But if you're a designer embedded within the organization itself, then you need to look at and work with everyone within that organization, which oftentimes means jumping through hoops and, pleasing the highest paid person in the room to get your solution out. And then design systems. I would say my issues I've had around design systems are adoption. And because developers are usually hard, they work a lot harder than designers I've seen, and their pressures are much more than designers. They are less able to implement the things that we really want to implement, simply because they don't have the time or bandwidth. And I've seen that as a big problem when it comes to design system adoption within where I work in the Middle East, because there just isn't enough time, isn't enough manpower to deploy a design system properly. That's why you hardly ever really see a company that has like a large, and by large I mean 2 or more people working just on the design system. A lot of the time it's assigned to the designers, or maybe there's one design system lead at best. Because I don't think it's being focused on enough. So my problems with design systems were adoption and trying to advocate the importance of doing things properly within the IT department itself as well.
Yeah, essentially you kind of need to deploy a new team that speaks with the designers and also with developers to ensure that whatever you're designing and building, everyone agrees and that it will improve the process. Whereas I can see that working with these developers that are probably working on pushing out features to meet other KPIs will try to contribute to a design system. There's just no balance and might be a bit too much work for them.
But I must say, in the experience, in some of the experiences we've had, we've done some work for like some really big media houses in London. And I think there's a fine balance. In this case, biggest buy-in, like Batsi's mentioned, is obviously getting buy-in from the developers, because the developers implement the true north or the North Star for the design. So if they don't buy in, they won't make time, and if they don't see value, they won't make time. But what I have seen work quite well is Ben mentioned to having this unique team that almost works as like a glue. It's like a glue team that sits between the dev team and also independently from the design team, but almost acts as like a independent design ops team. And what they do is, I suppose what what their core function is really to reduce the risk for everyone, right? So they focus on building this design system. And yes, in the beginning, it'll be like super bare bones, but the whole purpose of it is it's reusability, right? So if a dev is going to buy into something, rather have them buy into doing it once and then being able to reuse that thing, than have to constantly get them to buy into creating these components, because it's just wasting time, right? So we've seen a quite a big chunk of success when it comes to formalizing that team. And then what happens is that team becomes like an advocate for everyone. So they take in the pain, and it's really just about minimizing the risk and taking in all the different pain points from the design team. Because let's be honest, just because you implement a design system doesn't mean actually that your internal designers will actually use the design system as intended. We've also seen situations where we build a fancy design system and then designers just go, oh, detach. And then you're like, oh, why are you detaching? So that's also another problem. That's like educate and providing a platform to educate designers on understanding why not to detach, and it's all about the education around what are you designing for and what component you need to design it with. But design systems is like a whole topic on its own.
Yeah. I do have one question for you though, in regards to when we speak about digital transformation and knowing these big enterprise banks, usually they come from Sketch. Well, that's what we've seen before. Or they haven't really thought about it and just designed in teams with no design system. Have you experienced that working with these banks?
So can you say that again? So what do you mean by they come from Sketch?
So they come from Sketch. They have a design system in Sketch. You know that everyone needs to move to Figma. And the only reason why I'm making mention of that is because in South Africa, we were working with some of the banks, and there was a transition period where designers learn Figma and move from Sketch. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, every single time. So the thing with Sketch, Figma, those are just tools, right? And I understand that Figma is a much better tool at the moment than Sketch is. But before Figma was really mainstream, my first job as design system lead at Emirates MBD, a bank based in Dubai, we were using Sketch, Abstract, Zeppelin. That was like our trifecta of tools. And it worked really well. Our entire design system was built around that tool set. And because we were basically on the same floor with the developers, we had the advocates from the front-end engineer side that worked together with us to build out the design system, come up with naming conventions. So it was very collaborative how we created the design system. So it worked really, really well, despite that it was Sketch and Abstract. Abstract then got phased out when Sketch Cloud came into the picture because we didn't need Abstract anymore. But the point was, it's not really about the tool.
Yeah,
it's more about how do the teams work together.
Yeah,
and do you have people that are advocates for the design system within your respective teams, like design and engineering? So when it comes to what you're talking about, the transition from Sketch to Figma, I've been fortunate in that every time that's happened for me, and that's happened twice now as head of design. First time at Al Hilal Bank and now at Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. Every time we've done the switch, it's been paired with a redesign or a rebrand of the visual design of the app. So it was very easy to say, Sketch is cool, it's there, but that's the old design. Those are the old components. Now we are tasked with redesigning the app completely. So let's set up our component libraries, style guides, etc. in Figma, and every journey that we're designing from now on is done in Figma using these new design components that are done for the new look and feel. So I've been quite fortunate in that I haven't had to either rework existing components from Sketch to Figma or import components from Sketch to Figma. It's always been a blank slate, starting afresh.
Yeah, it's always an interesting journey when you drag a sketch file into Figma.
Yeah, it's just rare, right? I'm actually more productive not to do that. Just
Just start from scratch.
yeah, it's better.
So much easier. I'm gonna get a question, right? It's about culture. So we have a team, a multinational team. So like we have a few cultures in the team, and I love it because it brings a whole new spin on thinking. And I think if we're positioned ourselves as like we're passionate about building phenomenal fintech, I think it's great to have cross culture, because cross culture thinks of finance completely different. And if we can just capture that in our experiences, then I think we're on a good road. But in your experience from moving from, I mean, let's call it 3 milestones, right? So we've gone from Zimbabwe to South Africa, then from South Africa to Dubai. Obviously, culturally, as you've shifted into new environments, you've had to, even just the design culture around the team internally in the agency, et cetera, it's slightly shifted. Like, what have you seen that stayed culturally the same versus what's differed in your transition from Zimbabwe to South Africa, and then from South Africa to a whole new region in the world, which is obviously
Wow, that's a really good question, Scott. I don't know why I'd never thought of that, but it's a really good question. So let's start with Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe, because I'm Zimbabwean, everyone there looked like me. I would say 90% of our clients and people that we interacted to day to day were black, right? Black Zimbabwean. We had 1 or 2 white Zimbabwean clients, and like 1 white British client, but that was it. This is over the span of 5 years with over 200 clients.
Yeah.
Right. So that environment meant we could really just be ourselves. We didn't have to consider culture at all because it was all around us. It was business as usual, right? It was day to day. So even pitching ideas, talking to clients, understanding the cultural nuances with like logo design. If a startup founder was trying to build a brand for their company, you knew where that person came from, you knew what they grew up around. So it was very easy to come up with designs that were not just culturally relevant within Zimbabwe, but also relevant to that founder's vision for their business. So I would say that's probably the easiest environment to design it.
Yeah.
Because there are no external factors working against the vision for what you're trying to build.
Yeah.
Then moving to South Africa, it was very different because it went from I'm Zimbabwean, everyone around me is black Zimbabwean, to I'm the only Zimbabwean and 90% of the company is white. And this is, I mean, yeah, you guys are South African, so I'm thinking like you're British because yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. So I was and everyone was white except for like 1 or 2 black people, black South Africans. And I think I was one of the only like foreign black people. So I'm taken out of my comfort zone and I'm placed into a culture that's predominantly white. So I'll give you an example. We're standing at a client, Standard Bank actually, waiting to go up. And the 3 people I'm with are white South Africans. And they're all talking about, this one guy went diving in Croatia. The other one went diving in Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And here I am, I can't even swim. Yeah. Right? So it's very hard for me to participate in that conversation while we're waiting up to see our client, because just the cultural context is completely different. I mean, at that stage, I'd never even left Africa, right? Yeah. And these guys have not only left Africa, but they have diving licenses. They've experienced a world under the ocean that I haven't even seen. So you can think of it from just a exposure point of view, like I found that they were a lot more creative, and they're a lot much better insights around, you know, the world we live in, especially when you're working on like multinational and global clients. They could think of ideas just like that because they've been to these places, they've experienced these things. And here I am coming from my little bubble called Zimbabwe, without having that much exposure. So it was very different, but it allowed me to understand that that was my handicap and work on it.
Yeah.
So at least, you know, there was a silver lining there where I was able to now, for the first time, forced to open my thinking and my creative process to not just think, like I mentioned, in my little Zimbabwean cultural bubble, but start to think of design and creativity from a global perspective. That was South Africa. Then moving to Dubai was, I think, the culmination of all those things, where now you're living in a country where 90% of people are expats.
Yeah.
It's no longer actually just Zimbabwean culture, white South African culture. It's now global culture. Because, you know, in my team at my first job, we had people everywhere from every Middle Eastern country you can think of, right? Jordan, Egypt, Syria, the UAE, and then you're now looking at your Southeast Asian countries. You had the Indians, Pakistanis, then you had people from the West, Europe, right? You had British people. So now it was just a melting pot of culture. And I think the experience I had in South Africa, where I had to learn to broaden my horizons, allowed me to be able to broaden my horizons with everyone I met, because now you're building designs with people from every corner of the planet, and you need to be able to have conversations with them and ideate and be creative with them in a way that's not tied to any one particular way of thinking, but is now more like global and generic. So I feel like that whole journey really helped me. Like I can clearly see how I've evolved over time because of those three situations I've had to work through.
Thanks for sharing that. And like, you know, it's so interesting you said that. And I think we've been blessed with also a similar opportunity where how you design in South Africa, and maybe you've got one up on us because you've also got Zimbabwe, right? So, but how you design in South Africa is completely different to how you design for like an international audience.
Yeah.
But what's great is that with that learning, like I know for a fact when I was working at one of the bigger banks internally in South Africa, being able to design interface and experience that crosses all LSMs and also all technology touch points, USSD, ATM, branching into a digital environment that is like your app, your website, and keeping that experience consistent. Like I think in first world countries like London, New York, Tokyo, etc., I think they're so far from that the perspective is always just like new. But we forget that there's still a whole world of people who are still getting there. And I think it's great that I suppose all of us on this call have had that opportunity to design for that inclusion, because it just broadens our inclusion. So now I feel you sit in a position now in Emirates where, or Dubai, where you have that way of thinking. So you may mention now you've got people coming in from India, possibly Sri Lanka. You've got the MENA region, Northern Africa, maybe even Middle Africa as well. And with that knowledge in mind, it's easier to design for first world. But if you have that, you can bridge the gap between first world and third world, and then have an interface that can speak, universally. And I was just thinking now when you said that, I was like, wow, it must be fascinating to design for language right to left. Okay. So how do you design interface for everything that goes the other way? Because we're so used to things going left to right, right?
Yeah.
English is obviously left to right. And that's a good segue into probably the next question is, what is your challenge being in a way of thinking when designing for that? a difference in language? Or has the bank taken a position of we're English first because it speaks to the majority? Or how does that work in your environment?
Yeah, good. Another good question. So I think it's English first simply because our systems are English first.
Yeah.
Like our core banking system, for example, doesn't support Arabic script.
Okay.
As an example. So that means in your app, if someone is writing their name in their profile, they can't write it in Arabic because then the core banking system won't understand those words, right?
Yeah.
So it's all really English first. The Arabic translation and localization would only come in really for content approvals, I found. If we're designing a journey, we don't necessarily have to duplicate, this is the English journey, full journey. This is the full Arabic journey.
Okay.
Typically what happens is you design the English and then the content is then approved in English and then written in Arabic. But you don't necessarily always have to design the Arabic screen as the design team. A lot of the time, the approved Arabic content is then fed into the CMS or backend service.
Yeah.
And then, the conversion right to left, left to right, that just happens in the development environment. We don't have to worry. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it also depends where you work. Like this was certainly true at Emirates NBD, where we didn't actually really have to design the Arabic at all. The approval process and everyone there understood the amount of time that was saved by not having to do the Arabic, but also understood that the switch happens in the development. Whereas at my other when I worked for Al Hilal, it was different because the approvals were different in that the stakeholders that were responsible for approving the Arabic wanted to see it on the screens to understand the context of the content, right? So there, yes, we had to then design some of the Arabic screens. And the way we did that was the English and Arabic, our writers had access to Figma, so they could actually go in there and edit the content themselves. So yeah, it's different ways of doing things depending where you work. Yeah, as a non-Arabic speaking designer, there's really no handicap really.
Okay.
Because you always either leverage the Arabic speaking and writing team members, or the translation is just done in development, not even in design.
That's great. That's great input. Because then at least anyone watching this, like if you're a product designer, there's no barrier to entry to get into.
Not, definitely not.
Yeah, sure.
I think the focus is more on solution. If you're a solutions person, a solutions architect, if you are great at solving problems, that's more of a valuable asset than can you write in Arabic.
Yeah, well, it should always be like that, right? I mean, that's what our job is. Our jobs as designers are basically, that's the core competency, right? Can you solve a problem, use a problem? Ben, you have a question?
Yeah, so we would love to hear more about the ways in which you solve design problems and what kind of best testing methods, user testing methods, have you guys been using the most often currently at the place you're working at?
So where I'm working now, I've only been there for like 2 months and a half.
Okay.
Brand new.
I'm brand new. I can't really attest because we haven't started testing yet.
Yeah.
Like I said, we are in that place where we're transitioning from old to new. So we'll be testing the new very soon. But I think from what I've seen works really well, budget allowing, is working with a usability testing agency. So the way we worked was we would upfront, beginning of the year, we would pay for a certain number of sessions, like 100 sessions.
Yeah.
And each session basically corresponds to one user being interviewed or doing the test, right? So each session is a user. So that means each journey you're testing would use up like at least a minimum of 8 sessions if you're testing that journey with 8 people, right?
Yeah.
And then what we would do is, depending on what we want to test, we would let the agency know what kind of people we wanted to be involved in the test. And then they would do all the hard work. They would source, they would create the script for the questions based on the KPIs that we would have told them we want to test for. And then they would handle basically everything. I found that a much better way of doing it, because as the design team, we didn't waste time sourcing interviewees, worrying about the budget for gift cards, worrying about the venue, what tools we're going to use to test, how we're going to synthesize the results. All of it was done by the agency. We just had to focus on designing the initial experience, shipping it off to get tested, getting the results back, and then iterating on the design based on those synthesized results. So I found it's a much more productive way of doing it, because we saved a hell of a lot of time not having to worry about actually conducting the tests ourselves. It's going to be a little different where I'm working now, where we're probably going to have a hybrid, only because the company where I'm working now, they prefer face-to-face type of user testing methodologies. So where customers actually come and we interface with them, and there is a department that helps us to source people. They've got a budget for the gifts that you give each participant in the test. So it's going to be a little different. But where I see us, why I said hybrid initially, is we probably need to be a little more agile with our testing, because that whole process of bringing users in and testing takes a really long time.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have a hybrid approach where we can deploy user testing on like simple journeys and simple features quickly. And then if there's a big feature that where they actually want to interface with customers and see their reactions and interview them, then we would do that if necessary.
So, you know what's super interesting? I did some user testing at it's one of the bigger banks in South Africa. I just happened to be collaborating with the CX on this project. And I found one thing in my experience. I found one thing out that kept on coming back into the loop. And it's interesting because if you work in the bank, you become desensitized to the system's features, faults, and the fallacies within the bank, right? You know how to get around it. Right?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is if you have someone who's in the bank, like a designer who's working in the bank, do maybe the user testing. I found that, and it was just purely when I was doing the observation, I found that it's quite easy for those designers to fall into a bias, because they know what they're designing, and they know how it should work, and they know how the person should interact with what they're designing. So what ends up happening is, even though they're trying their hardest to ask questions that are non-biased, they tend to lead the user on just a little bit, instead of not knowing anything at all. And the only way I know that is we had an external agency similar to yourself come in and do it, and I supervised, and then I was supervising another designer who was internal do it. And I could see just by the way that they were asking questions where the internal designer was almost like subconsciously staying in their head, oh, but you know how to do it. Like, it's like this. But they weren't saying that, but you can see they were guiding it like that. And it was quite interesting because I was like, that's probably something that you should keep on top of mind, because you're not solving anything if that's the case,
Exactly. The way we counteracted that at my other job was we had a quite senior user research specialist.
Oh yeah.
And she basically not explicitly, but she trained us how to interview people in an unbiased way.
Okay.
And watching her do her thing during the interviews also taught us how to not lead, not people when you're interviewing them and how to do it properly. So you actually found that when we were doing it, even though we were from the bank when we're doing the interviews, we learned how to do it properly just by watching a professional do it.
Yeah,
You've learned from the sensei.
Exactly.
yeah. I think there's benefits to both, right? Because I think that the designer internally will probably care more and gauge on further questions that maybe an external company wouldn't gauge on. So there's an iteration to it, right? Especially when we work with these startups and we do these user tests, is after doing two, you gauge that maybe I should be asking these two questions for the next user test that might help us actually define certain things that we didn't initially think of. So there's benefits to both, which I think when you going back to your hybrid model is where I think that is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
The best way to think about it. But
I have a question for you guys. So how is the product design, how mature would you say the product design profession is within the UK? And that's simply because there's this idea that, you know, the Europe and Americas are a lot more advanced than MENA, right? But when I've worked with agencies from the UK, it's been atrocious. Obviously.
We're working with the wrong agencies.
Definitely working with the wrong agencies. But I think it's that because stakeholders thought, you know, if we're going to build this digital bank, let's outsource to people that know what they're doing. And then it turns out people really didn't know what they were doing. Like how do you see the landscape, like the product design landscape? How mature is it really, according to what you think it should be?
yeah, so I think if we're speaking about scale-ups and enterprise, I think the ones that seem successful, they are quite mature. You know, from a design perspective, you have the principal designer, you have the lead designers with their squads, which you know, have senior UX designers, UI designers, and mids and juniors, and they're all collaborating together on sets of features as a squad. They are quite mature, but from an agency perspective, because there are just so many different types of verticals, what we see in this landscape is agencies that are hyper-focused. For example, we have a friend who works in an agency where they just deal with sports. And their design systems are matured to be able to copy and paste these design systems across their clientele. And that is mature in its own way because they are able to work with their new clients and be able to duplicate the system and seamlessly just work on these products that are pretty much the same thing. Whereas when we speak about us, I would definitely say that we're quite mature, probably sitting between medium and high. I think there's always space for us to learn. For example, we kind of connect with product designers along our journey, just so that we could learn from their expertise and share experiences. Because really it comes down to different perspectives. Because this person could have gone down this journey where they've learned a different set of problems that we've never seen before, and how they've managed to solutionize with those experiences that could speed up our growth. So what tends to happen is when we work on a design system and we speak about the design tokens plugin, we've heard about this we always knew about it, okay, but we really only started using it about end of 2021. We started looking at it, and
the Figma tokens plugin?
Exactly. We didn't really see the value of it until we spoke to someone who works on it every day.
Right.
And one of the things that they were speaking and educating us on is they got a brand, this massive app with millions of users. And one of the biggest problems that they had to shift in is they needed to use design tokens to work on to have a systemized color token system for all the sub brands, because all the sub brands, one could be black, one could be red, one could be yellow, pertaining to kind of the service offering that they have for each of those verticals. And he needed to sit for several months to define those tokens, to iterate on those tokens, and to be able to work with the design team collectively, or the squads, and also the developers, and implement the process. Okay?
Yes.
So when he was kind of explaining this to us, our minds were opened to that. Wow, we could explore this and productionize it internally for our clients. We're building a very robust token system that doesn't need to now, but can factor in sub-brands in future. So when you speak about how we built our design system, we have a web app design system and a mobile design system where we factored things like that in. I can't speak for the rest of the agencies if they've explored it as far and wide, but sometimes what we do feel is that we might be going overboard, considering that maybe this is a problem that, they can solve in future and not necessarily now. So questions like that arise when we explore things like that.
I have some insight. I have some insight I can share there. Though more so the difference between my experience in South Africa, then London, and then just being able to sit back and like look at like it holistically. So I think from an agency perspective, when it comes to maturity, for them, a client is a client is a client, right? Like, cool. Are we solving the solution? Is it in budget? Are we going to meet deadline? Great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's as much as I care. As long as we hit those three things, the client will be happy and we continue, right?
Yeah.
But if I was like, let's say, I don't know, if I was a managing director of a bank and I had to go to an agency, what I would want to see is, like you made mention about it, I'd want to see, cool, let me see the array of designers that you have, and let me assess, the complexity of problems that they solve. Okay, what are how complex, or how far and how deep are these problems that your designers can solve? Okay, and that will give me insight into like how mature your designers actually are, because. And I'm sure we've all heard this term, like, what is actually a product designer? Okay. And for me, a product designer would be a human being or a designer that can go into any organization and take that organization through an entire life cycle of creating a solution and launching that solution and doing everything in between, right? Solutionizing, designing, testing, validating, contextualizing, and then outputting, obviously not developing, but outputting what the solution would be, and then also handing over that in a succinct way that the developer can take it, implement it, and it will be as intended as when it was designed. Okay, now that's deemed a unicorn designer. I don't know why we call them that, but anyway, if I was a bank,
you never see that.
Yeah, they're hard to find. They're in the cracks. But if I was an end of a bank, I'd deem that to be mature. But then in the UK, you see things like Ben said, specialization, right? I've met designers who only specialize in color at enterprise level. Like, how do we build systems for color for our systems at scale, right? So if you think of like a media conglomerate, like someone who's got maybe 12 sub-brands of publications, how do we design tokens of color that can expand across all the componentry, like Ben mentioned, that expand across all the componentry that sits in app and web for all 12 of our brands, okay? Yes. And all he does every day is systemize color. Okay. Now, in my opinion, that's quite mature. I would never see that in South Africa. You would never see that. You would have people who know a large deal about color, but they don't sit every day and just systemize color. So I think when it comes to maturity and people working with agencies, what they need to be careful of is don't be wooed by a big name. Like, don't be wooed by a Deloitte or an Accenture. because it has a brand. Yeah, brand is linked to risk, but what you want is specialization, right? So, and perspective. How many apps have banking or fintech apps have they designed? Across how many regions have they designed? And do any of those regions actually relate to a region that I'm building a product for? Prime example, the MENA region. So how many applications or experiences has this agency developed in the MENA region? Do you actually understand contextually a persona or archetype of a user in a MENA region? Because it's great to say, yeah, let's build a Revolut inside. Okay, but like, is that how do people in Dubai or do expats from around the world working and living and spending in Dubai, can they think like and use an interface similar to Revolut? Now, Revolut is phenomenally agnostic, so the design is phenomenal, but I'm just using that as a reference.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it comes back to when we said we're able to design for customers in various LSMs simply because we've lived that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a designer in Europe, you don't have to worry about like design for low bandwidth, for example. No. Because you're always designing with like the best case scenario in mind. Whereas if you're designing in South Africa, it's a little different. And when you come to MENA now, and you have people from all over the world converging at one point, then yes, that context, like you're saying, that context definitely helps. Because you can design for super affluent people, and you can design for people from emerging economies as well. Mm-hmm. And design has to cater for both, and your solutions have to cater for both.
Yeah, and it's a massive task to also retain the brand equity of a bank across those such diverse LSMs, right? Someone who's got 10 Lamborghinis, okay, when they use, maybe they're using a different type of bank, but if they were using your bank, how do they feel that level of premium versus someone who maybe doesn't have 10 Lamborghinis, just wants trust and loyalty of an app, right? And how do you keep that? It's a real trick.
It's interesting you say that, because I was thinking the other day, there's this way of thinking, I think they call it life-centered design, where we're starting to realize that the problem with user-centered design is it tends to focus on one aspect of that user, right? So the questions you find are, how does a user transfer money and or remit money to their home country? All right, as an example. So in the Middle East, a lot of people, expats here, will obviously send money home, right? So if you're designing a journey and you're looking at your personas, you're like, okay, how do people remit money? And then you try and build the journey for remittancy, right? But coming back to what you said, it's understanding that entire person's life, right? And how they go about their day and what their actual job to be done is. Because you might find that it's not really, if you want to really service that customer and the guy with 10 Lamborghinis, then you have to take a step back and look at the entirety of the experience. It's no longer just about the mobile app, right? It's more where do they access that feature? On what device do they access that feature? Do they have people around them that rely on them when they access that feature? So there's a lot more you can take into account. You take into account that life-centered way of thinking, where it's about how you deliver the experience end to end on the platform itself, and above and beyond that.
I love that. Life-centered design. Amazing. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Batsi, thank you so much today for joining us on this call. Really insightful experiences that we've just heard from this chat. Where can everybody find you?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Scott, for having me. So you can find me online on YouTube. I think if you search for Batsi Madzonga, you'll find my channel there. So like and subscribe, as they say. You can also find me on LinkedIn, same thing, Batsi Madzonga. Those are the two platforms I'm on. My website is madzonga.com. All my relatives hate me because I took the domain name for myself. Just come, it is what it is. So madzonga.com. Make sure you grab yang.com and whiteley.com.